Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Small but mighty crowd, right? Let's try that one more time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We learned from the example of the Battle of Badr that it's never a numbers game, right? It's always about the taqwa that the numbers have. So alhamdulillah, jazakallah khair to all of you for being here for our Palestine 101 presentation. Tonight we're here with American Muslims for Palestine, AMP for short. And to put it very simply, our goal is to get US money out of Israel. Okay? US money out of Israel. Does anybody know what this past Wednesday's date was? Okay, you just kind of jumped to my second question, but thank you, Muhammad. Yes, this last Wednesday was tax day. And as we know, we all pay our taxes. Alhamdulillah, inshallah. If you don't tell me. But we all pay our taxes. But it is exactly those taxes that are funding the genocide that's happening in Palestine. So it becomes directly our responsibility to do something about it. Believe it or not, we actually do have a voice and a say in how our tax dollars are being used. The problem is we've been conditioned to think that our voice and our efforts don't make a difference. But the reality is that they do. And so it's our job to do something to make that difference, inshallah. So without further ado and without going into too many details about AMP, we'll talk about that a little more later, inshallah. We're going to get started with our presentation. To introduce, we have Sister Lubnaa Hamaad with us. She has a master's in education and, if I remember correctly, curriculum and training. So, mashallah, she's very well educated from FAU. And Palestinian, were you born in Palestine? No. I'm giving like a whole history on, it's going to be a Sister Lubnaa 101 now. So, Sister Lubnaa is Palestinian, mashallah, but as you guys know, this cause is not just about Palestinian, it's about everybody. We have myself, I'm a Pakistani, we have Indians in our organization, we have Sudanis in our organization, because this is an ummah's problem, right? It is our ummah that needs to move. So without further ado, Sister Lubnaa.
Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. It's my pleasure and honor to be here. Jazakallah khair for hosting us. I've heard a lot about this masjid, so I'm really excited to get to meet everybody, inshallah, on one-on-one, inshallah. I actually, when I first moved to Florida in 2000, this was most likely the first masjid I came to because we lived in Kendall for about a few months before we moved to Broward. So alhamdulillah. So why are we doing this presentation as AMP? Palestine 101, why do we need to learn about Palestine's history? Because living in this country, we hear the history of Palestine given to us in a very fragmented way, right? They tell us, oh, it started in World War II, World War I, Holocaust, 1948, 67. We're never really given the full picture of what's going on in Palestine. We're never given the correct context of how we got to what we are on today. Also, it's a good time for us to reflect on the history and learn from lessons from the history. So we as Muslims don't repeat those same mistakes that got us to where we are. So it's very important to learn the history, be educated, especially in an era now where people find their own ways to get their education, right? We don't rely on textbooks, we don't rely on media, people are going to direct resources to learn. So, but the reality of Palestine is much deeper. Its story stretches back to thousands of years. The story of civilizations that thrived there, prophets who walked the streets of Palestine. But not only that, empires also rose and fell, and ordinary people built families, farms, and communities in that land. It is also, unfortunately, a story of colonialism, displacement, and resilience, a struggle that continues today. So here's just a quick overview of what our presentation is going to be about. So we're going to first start with a brief history of the ancient history, who are the first inhabitants of historical Palestine. We're going to move on to Islamic history and then modern history, examining colonialism, Nakba, and occupation. Then we're going to also address common myths that we're faced with when we're talking about Palestine, right? We always have those very clear statements that you need to be ready to debunk and respond to. We're going to talk about the role of international law, the United Nations, International Court of Justice. You've been hearing all those words very recently. Then we're going to explore Zionism and AIPAC and its role, again, in framing the picture of the struggle today. We're going to tackle also history of Palestinian resistance, American money and its role in supporting the Zionist state of Israel, and then finally we will break down how the narrative is framed in classrooms, media, and politics as well, inshallah. So by the end, my hope is that you will all not only know the history, but understand the urgency to participate, take a position, and be present, inshallah. Okay, so again, when we address what is the problem, it's always framed as a conflict, right? You hear in the news, Middle East conflict between Palestine and Israel, and so on. It frames it as if it's an issue between two equal sides. Well, we know better, right? It's more about colonization, occupied people, resisting one of the most powerful militaries in the world. Sometimes it's also reduced to religion, right? Say the Muslims versus Jews. But we know that historical Palestine has always had Muslims, Christians, and Jews living side by side in that land. So the problem is not really lack of history. The problem is how the history is told and whose voices are heard. So in this diagram, this just shows literally the past 75 years of history. And you can see how the land has been kind of eaten up, right? Start with small colonies in northern and east Palestine. Those colonies grew to occupation. And then that occupation even grew further and further in 1967. And today, this is literally what is left of the historical Palestine just within the span of about 60, 70 years. So starting with the ancient history of Palestine, we're going to go back almost 10,000 years BC. So we're going to look at the first inhabitants of Palestine. Okay. So the archaeological evidence shows that the first inhabitants of Palestine is a group of people called the Natufians. They lived from 13,000 BC. So that's a very 15,000 years ago. They were simply sedentary hunters and gatherers. There wasn't any kind of civilization or agriculture. They're just people who survived, the traditional ancient way people survived. After that, and oh, by the way, before I go further, this is the area that's believed, so it's mostly like on the east of the Mediterranean. And they also were the first people to inhabit the city of Jericho, called in Arabic Ariha. Ariha in all historical textbook is known to be the oldest city in the world. So the oldest city in the world with a civilization was in ancient Palestine. After that, around, the years are not showing. It's okay. So after that came the Canaanites. The Canaanites lived about anywhere 2000 BC. And Canaanites are a group of people who actually migrated from Arabia, from the Arabian Peninsula to historic Palestine. So those were the first Arabs that moved to Palestine, 2000 BC. Their name comes from Canaan. Does anybody know who Canaan is? Canaan is actually the grandson of Prophet Noah, right? Because Canaan is the son of Ham, and Ham is the son of Prophet Noah alayhi salam. After that, within that same period, you can see from the map, with the Canaanites lived other groups of people, including the Phoenicians, Amorites, Jebusites. They're all descendants of the same people. Phoenicians lived along the coastal areas, and so this area has been pretty occupied from a very long time ago. After that came the rule of the ancient Egyptians. Ancient Egyptians actually ruled over historic Palestine. That was actually the time when Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam moved to Palestine. Anybody know where Prophet Ibrahim was born? He was born in the city of Ur, which is in modern day Iraq. At the time it was Mesopotamia. So he was born in Ur, Iraq, and then we know Prophet Ibrahim made a journey, migrated to Bilad al-Sham, Damascus, and so on, and then to Egypt. But he had both of his sons in Palestine, prophets Ismail and Ishaq. Let's go, sisters. Good job. Prophet Ismail and Ishaq were both born in Palestine. Of course, you know that Prophet Ismail was moved to Mecca with his mother Hajar. Prophet Ishaq remained in Palestine. And Prophet Ishaq had his son. Check comprehension. Son of Prophet Ishaq is Yaqub, right? And Yaqub was also born in Palestine. And Prophet Yaqub had how many sons? 12 sons. One of them is the famous Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, right? All of them were born in Palestine. Of course, we know the story of Prophet Yusuf, how they had to they eventually all moved to Egypt. That happened during the ancient Egyptian rule. After that, of course, from the descendants of, or the kids of Prophet Yaqub, we know he had 12 sons. They lived in Egypt. From their descendants came Prophet Musa and Prophet Harun, right? The siblings. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered Prophet Musa to take the Israelites out of Egypt and go to the Holy Land, right? And of course, we know the story of Israelites and what they mean. So where does the word Israel come from? For us, Israel is actually the nickname of Prophet Yaqub. Yaqub's nickname is Israel or Israel, which means the servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when they say Banu Israel, we're talking about the descendants of Prophet Yaqub, which is his 12 sons, from which came the 12 tribes. From their descendants, after they moved to the Holy Land, came Prophet Dawood and Prophet Sulaiman. And those were the first people to actually establish a kingdom of the descendants of Yaqub, which they call the Israelite kingdom, in Palestine. Prophet Dawood and Prophet Sulaiman, their kingdom lasted about 90 years. Okay, so keep that in mind so we can see where the connection is. After that, after the death of Prophet Sulaiman, his kids kind of divided the kingdom. That's where you hear the words Judea, Samaria. That's the children of Sulaiman dividing the parts of their father ruled, and then the whole kingdom of the Prophet Sulaiman and Yaqub and their descendants altogether did not last more than 200 years. So again, keep that in mind because we're going to get back to it. After that, after the Israelites losing ownership or rule over there were many foreign empires. That included the Assyrians and Babylonians that came from where? Iraq, modern day Iraq. They prosecuted Jews very badly in the Holy Land. They even took them as slaves, moved many of them with them to Mesopotamia. After that came the Persian rule. And there was a famous king known as King Cyrus. He actually allowed the Jews, many of them, to return to the Holy Land and to practice their religion freely. And then there was Greek rule. Alexander the Great conquered the Holy Land for the Greeks. And last but not least is the Roman rule. And the Roman rule literally lasted for 600 years, leading up to when the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ came in as a messenger. And by the way, just going back to the Roman rule very quickly, that's the time when Prophet Isa alayhi salam was born. Prophet Isa alayhi salam was born right at the beginning of the Roman rule. So just to put things in context, Prophet Isa was born at the beginning of the Roman rule of the Holy Land. And of course, if you don't know the details of the story, Prophet Isa, it's pretty interesting what happened because he was also prosecuted by the Romans as a prophet. So now we're going to make the connection between ancient history and Islamic and modern history. So of course we know Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Does anybody know, little kids, maybe you guys know, when was he born? What year? Prophet Muhammad, 570, right? 570 AD, that's when Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was born. He was born also toward the end of the Roman rule. So Prophet Isa was born at the beginning of the Roman rule. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was born toward the end of the Roman rule of historic Palestine. In 636, under the leadership of Khalifa Umar ibn al-Khattab, the second Khalifa after the Prophet's death, radiallahu anhu, Muslims were able to conquer many cities in Bilad al-Sham, including Damascus and so on, eventually leading to the conquest of Bayt al-Maqdis, Al-Quds, or Jerusalem. And what's fascinating about the way that Umar ibn al-Khattab conquered it, that it was completely peaceful without a single bloodshed. There was a treaty known as the Umari Pact, or Al-Uhd al-Umariya, where it was signed between Umar radiallahu anh and the Christians of Jerusalem, their patriarchs and their priests. Prophet Umar radiallahu anh promised and guaranteed complete freedom and protection of all the churches, synagogues, and any people who worship for complete freedom and protection under the rule of the Muslims, subhanAllah. Even he was offered to pray in a masjid, in the Church of Holy Sepulchre, which is the most famous church worldwide. Umar radiallahu anh refused. He said, because maybe Muslims later on will come and claim it as a Muslim's holy site because I prayed on it. And he prayed in a separate area that now is a separate masjid in Al-Quds. So it's really unprecedented, what the tolerance and the protection that Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu has offered. So after that, after Umar ibn Khattab's rule, the Crusaders about 400 years came and unfortunately conquered Jerusalem. And compared to how what he did, the Crusaders actually committed one of the most heinous massacres in history in Jerusalem, where they have killed more than 10,000 Muslims and Jews who took refuge in Masjid al-Aqsa from the Crusaders. Complete bloodshed. There was a bloodbath in the Masjid al-Aqsa. And by the way, talking about Masjid al-Aqsa, I just want to point something out. People always ask, what's the temple, what's the Masjid al-Aqsa? So whatever the Zionists, Israelis, Jews claim as their holy temple, it's actually the al-Masjid al-Aqsa. We believe it's the same place, it is al-Masjid al-Aqsa. And when they talk about rebuilding the temple, it's actually the Masjid al-Aqsa that we have built, that what Prophet Sulaiman has built earlier on, just to put things into context. Okay, of course we know the story of Salah ad-Din. He later on, the Crusaders only occupied Palestine for about 90 years, a little bit less than 90 years. Then Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi came in and conquered Masjid al-Aqsa, liberated it, and now it became under Muslim rule again. And if you guys want to learn about Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, there is a great series in the Maghrib Institute, talks about the entire history of Salah ad-Din. Within that period, after that came many Muslim rules. So it started with, of course, the Rashidi Khilafah. After that came the Umayyad, Abbasids, Fatimids, Seljuks, and then after Salah ad-Din came the Ayyubis, and then many other Muslim rulers as well. Even after Salah ad-Din, there were some periods where the Crusaders have ruled for a few decades, but for the majority, until the Ottoman rule, it was completely, meaning from Salah ad-Din's Ayyubi to less than 100 years, it was ruled by Muslims, for exception of a very few periods. After Salah ad-Din came the Ayyubis, the Mamluks, and then finally the Ottomans. Within the Ottoman rule, they actually were very tolerant. They allowed Jews to actually move and live anywhere within the Ottoman Empire. No Jew can deny what the Ottoman Empire has allowed them to practice and move and live anywhere within the Ottoman Empire, including Palestine. And actually, if you look here, the first Zionist settlement was in 1878. That was when the Holy Land or historic Palestine was under Ottoman rule. And they did it with the permission of the Ottomans as well. Okay, this is just a quick picture of the Masjid al-Aqsa. A lot of people ask, what is the Masjid al-Aqsa? Is it the one with the golden dome? Is it the one with the gray dome? But it's actually the entire area. It's about 35 acres that's under the fence that you can see right there. So anywhere you pray within that area, you're praying within the Masjid al-Aqsa. Okay, so then comes World War I. Of course, we know that the Ottoman Empire allied with who in World War I? Germany. With Germany, right? Germany and the Central Powers. They wanted to protect their borders, and that was against, of course, Great Britain, the United States, and other European powers. So something really interesting happened in World War I. Of course, a lot of the Arab countries were ruled by the Ottomans at the time. And there was really kind of tension between the Ottomans and the Arabs at the time, because the Arabs were highly taxed. The Ottomans are fighting a war. They were also forced into fighting also in many battles in World War I. So there was a lot of resentment within the Arabs. So the group led by a guy called Sharif Hussein, who was the governor of Mecca and Medina, they started what we call the Arab Revolt against the Ottomans. So is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, to them they justified it that, of course we want our liberation, we're tired of being heavily taxed and being underrepresented in government and all that, which are all valid reasons. But unfortunately that caused them to ally with who? With Great Britain, right? And against the Ottomans. So in order for they justified, yeah, we want our, our rights, they allied with the British against the Ottomans. So they were fighting literally along with the British. And if you guys know a guy called Lawrence of Arabia, he was an intelligence officer, he led Arab armies along with British armies into Palestine, into Jerusalem, literally, unfortunately. So that eventually, we know that at the end of World War I, of course, the Ottomans are going against, along with Germany, they lost the war. And Great Britain and its allies have won the war. So what happened here is that Sharif Hussein was actually put in a trap. He was promised that once the war is over and they win, they're going to give him all of the Arab countries, all of them, Iraq, Bilad al-Sham, Saudi Arabia, and you're going to be a ruler of all of those countries. Meantime, Great Britain and France were cooking a plot called the Sykes-Picot Agreement. This map shows you what Great Britain and France sat down and literally drew with pen and paper how they're going to divide those pieces of land after the Ottoman pieces of land after the war. Those are the lands that were promised to who? To Sharif Hussein. And when he found out, he was very upset, but he was in a trap already, right? What is he going to do? So he started negotiating with him, And eventually, of course, he got nothing out of it, to be honest with you. Within the same, that's in 1916. 1917 is the Balfour Declaration. So the Balfour Declaration was a British government statement supporting a national home for Jewish people in Palestine, issued by Arthur Balfour, who was the foreign minister of Great Britain, to Lord Rothschild, who was actually a British Jewish banker at the time, and just promising them, we're going to support you getting a homeland in Palestine. So that was also one of those like black spots in history. Of course, at the end of World War I, the Ottoman Empire fell, and now the British had complete control over ancient Palestine. Okay, now next, let's move to World War II. Between World War I and World War II, the British controlled the entire Palestine. By the way, if you guys want to see, there's a presentation if anybody's interested as well over there. The British had complete control over Palestine, and it was, of course, people of Palestinians felt occupied, and there was, of course, abuse and prosecutions and so on. But at the same time, that accelerated Jewish immigration to Palestine, right? It was starting before, but this time between the two world wars, the British taking control, there was a huge acceleration of Jewish immigration. Also, as World War II started and about to end, in 1947, the United Nations said, you know what, they saw that, as the immigration to Palestine increased, of course the Arabs in Palestine didn't like it. They saw that these people are slowly taking the resources, taking more of their land and so on. So the conflict was pretty clear. The United Nations came up with a partition plan in 1947, and here's what's interesting. So it said that, okay, let's divide the land between Jews and Arabs, Jews who just recently immigrated, and Arabs who lived there their entire lives. Not only that, they said, okay, the Jews get 57% of historic Palestine, Palestinians get the remaining 43% of Palestine. Although the population of Jews at the time was only 30%, and they owned only 9% of the land. So you can imagine the Arabs in Palestine refused. The Jews, of course, they accepted, it's better than nothing. And that kind of also escalated the situation until we got to the Nakba, or the catastrophe of 1948. The catastrophe of 1948 started when the British troops, and the British, they were like, this is too much things for us to do in Palestine, let's just leave. The same day the first British army left Palestine, that was when the State of Israel was declared. And within a few minutes, the United States, Russia, Great Britain, all of them what? Verified, say, yeah, of course we support the creation of the State of Israel. So the Nakba caused about 700 to 750,000 Palestinians to be displaced from their homelands. There was many massacres. There were people who were killed. If you're interested in learning just about a direct testimony, watch the documentary called Tantura. You will have people from Zionist paramilitary factions like the Irgun and the Haganah testifying clearly that they committed rape, murder, gunpoint shooting innocent Palestinian civilians. That all happened not only in 1948, but even before the declaration of the State of Israel. So many times they say, oh, we did that only after the Israeli-Arab War. No, it started much earlier than that. Okay, so after that, that's of course when the State of Israel was created, and that started the Arab-Israeli war between Arab countries and Israel, because after Israel was declared, that ended up, of course, the Arabs didn't win that war. Israel ended up with 78% of the land. Even when they were granted by the United Nations only, what? 57. So again, the situation gets worse and worse. After that, in 1967, Israel unilaterally started an attack on Egypt and Syria and Jordan. That's in the Arab-Israeli War of 1967. And that ended up, of course, it was a 6-day war where the Arabs lost also in 6 days, caused another 300,000 Palestinians to become refugees. So adding up all those numbers together, we're talking about 1 million to 1.5 million Palestinians who got displaced. As a result of the Naksa, or we call it the setback, along with what was occupied earlier, now they took all of historical Palestine. So that included Gaza, West Bank, and East Jerusalem, and plus that, the entire what? Does anybody know what else was occupied? Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, Golan Heights from Syria. So literally the size area of the so-called State of Israel tripled after the Naksa. Okay. So after that, after that in 1976, Egypt signed a peace treaty normalizing with Israel. It got the Sinai Peninsula back in return for recognizing the right of the state of Israel to exist and normalizing relationships. Okay, so now moving more into the 20th century, occupation, exploitation, and occupation have the right to resist. And the following resolution also described that they have the right to resist in any form possible. They can resist in any way, and that included armed resistance. So the United Nations secured the right of any people who are occupied to resist with armed resistance if necessary. Next, ICC and ICJ. I know we hear those terms a lot, right? So what's the difference? As I mentioned earlier, ICJ is part of the United Nations. It works with disputes between nations. ICC is also an international entity, but it more is accountability for individuals. So we talked about what the ICJ has issued. Now the ICC, of course, you guys know, in May 24, they issued an arrest warrant, right, against Yoav Gallant and Benjamin Netanyahu. So what we learned from all of this is the issue is not that there is no laws. It's not that there is no rules, international law. They're all there. What the issue is with what? With implementation, right? Where's the implementation? Who's being held accountable? The laws are there, the issue warrants are there, but nobody is implementing any of that. Okay. So next we're going to quickly talk about Zionism and the role of AIPAC. So when we talk about history of Zionism, Zionism is a very new kind of, coming into the scene. It's very new. We know, of course, that Judaism is as a religion, right? It's a monotheistic religion, just like Islam and Christianity. They believe in one God. They have, sets of rules to live by and so on. But Zionism is more of a political nationalist movement. It's actually a secular movement. It has nothing to do with religion, right? It's a nationalist secular movement. It's just about creating this identity of Jews being a race and an ethnicity, not just a religion. So, and the whole point of Zionism is to create a home country for the Jews. Of course, we know that the early thoughts of Zionists didn't really consider Palestine at the beginning. Their options were actually a lot of other countries in Africa, even Argentina. So their connection is not really about the land, more of just as a place or a safe place for the Jews. So that's the misunderstood ideology of establishing a Jewish state. It's not really about the connection about Palestine. At the time, they just wanted a place where they can all be together in one place and feel safe. So the first Zionist Congress happened in 1897. That is long before the Holocaust. A lot of Jews will come to you and argue, but the Holocaust, what could we have done? Yes, we sympathize and all of that. But that wasn't the cause for the creation of the State of Israel. The plans to create this state happened, or were starting long ago before. And of course, something very important that we have to address is the definition of anti-Semitism. Of course, we know how insane it is now, right? If you criticize the State of Israel, if you talk about a genocide, if you use the word free Palestine, you're accused of being anti-Semitic. Of course, we are as Muslims against any form of anti-Semitism or Islamophobia or targeting any religious group. But the current definition of anti-Semitism is becoming pretty absurd. So next, we talk about AIPAC. Of course, I'm sure you guys have heard AIPAC a lot recently, especially with coming elections. Thankfully now, politicians are becoming more aware. A lot of them are talking about not taking any AIPAC money, right? Denouncing AIPAC. AIPAC is the American-Israeli Public Affairs Committee. It donates about $3.5 million a year to politicians' campaigns. And that's, I know you seem surprised that that's a lot of money, but guess what? How much they get in return? In return, the United States gives the State of Israel $3.8 billion a year. So to them, that's a great investment, right? Like what, 1,000 times fold? It's crazy. So to them, it's a great deal. They invest $3.5 million a year. They get $3.8 billion a year in US aid money. Up to date, the United States gave Israel $310 billion of our taxpayers' money. Just from October 7th till today, the United States gave Israel $21 billion. So that number really inflated in the past 3 years. Okay, this just again shows you the insane amount of aid to Israel, most of it military compared to all other all other countries receiving aid from the United States. Okay. So next we're going to be quickly talking about what's our role now? What can we do? How can we fight the narrative? Of course, I hope you guys learned that the history is not simple, right? It's very complicated. There's a lot of details that are omitted from media, textbooks, and so on. It's very important to pay attention to biased terminology, right? What do we hear all the time? Oh, IDF, Israeli Defense Forces. Oh, them, they are the extremists, they are the terrorists. We never hear the words occupation, apartheid, genocide, displaced, refugees, right? Don't hear those terms. So focusing on the terminology is very important. Can you guys think of anybody want to share terminologies that they hear also? Other than conflict, we also talked about conflict. Go ahead. Okay, Middle East. Yeah, that's a very Eurocentric term because it describes, that part of the world from the perspective of Great Britain. Yeah, awesome. Can you guys think of any other terms that you want to share that you feel like trigger you when you hear them in the news or anything else? Sorry, what did you say?
She said Israel triggered.
Okay, it's a big trigger for sure. Okay, so it's very important. Also, when we talk as Muslims, right, we should use those words: apartheid, displaced people, occupation. All of them, we have to use those words, and they get triggered with those words too. Trust me, I went through that. Of course, textbook biases. In high school, your kids probably go through high school, never heard about any of the things we talked about today. So for sure, but now colleges are becoming more aware. Students are getting their resources or their information from other reliable resources. Of course, there is a great focus on Israel's security, right? They always say, oh, we're defending ourselves, they started it. Even when they talk about the number of casualties in Gaza that are in some statistics reach 100,000, they talk, oh, but who started it, right? They completely dismiss anything that has to do with the Palestinians just because they're defending their sense of security. Of course, US aid to Israel, the amount of money, this is our tax money, right? It could be used what? For our schools, for our healthcare, for our education, affordable housing. We're going through a crisis in the United States. Affordability is becoming very difficult, but they're willing to pay what? Billions of dollars to send bombs to kill innocent civilians. Okay, and of course the issue of limited Palestinian voices, right? You barely hear Palestinian voices being put in media. Of course, we know the number of journalists. Over 220 journalists were killed in Gaza. Just last week, Hamaad was killed. And subhanAllah, this is to completely silence the live stream genocide that's been going on. And of course, the dehumanization of Palestinians. I'm sure you guys have seen in the news articles, right? What does it say? Oh, 10 Palestinians were killed today. As if they were killed randomly, right? Or got a heart attack, or it was an earthquake, right? They never talk about who committed it. I'm sorry?
That they're dead.
Right, or their deaths, right? The death toll today is this much. Only in numbers. They don't show Palestinians as humans with faces, who go to schools, who live normal lives, who have ambitions, who are educated, who have professions, have families. Okay, so now we get to our last part. Perfect. So our last part here is debunking some of the myths, so this is going to be a little bit interactive. So let's start with the first one. So if somebody approaches you and says the land was empty when Jews arrived.
Lies.
Obviously it's a lie. Well, how are you going to support that? Come on, it's interactive. I need you guys to help me out.
Who was there before?
Right, we're talking about a history that started what? 15,000 years ago, there were people. And who had a civilization, agriculture. For the oldest city in the world is in Palestine. It's impossible to think about it as an empty land.
The Palestinians voluntarily left their homes in 1948. True or false?
False. Give me back my grandfather's land.
False, absolutely. So what happened in 1948? The Nakba. Forced displacement of Palestinian families from their homes.
And don't forget also, use those words. Urgun forces, Haganah forces, paramilitary Zionist militias entered cities, killed babies, raped women. That's exactly the reality I'm talking about. This is what happened to my own village as well. So they need to understand that the acts have to be described as is.
The establishment of Israel was just a response to the Holocaust. How do you mean? Who's answering? I have no idea.
Before. It was a time before, and she was answering.
And I'm sorry, what were you saying?
World War One.
It was since World War I that they were already on this endeavor. Absolutely.
And even before, remember, in the late 1900s.
1887.
Weren't they actually
Yeah.
rejected by a few other places before even landing into Palestine?
We mentioned that, yeah. Argentina, Africa.
Yeah.
Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East.
False.
Come on, brothers, we need some brothers side as well.
From the brothers. False? Okay. How is this false? How is it false?
Democracy only exists for Israel.
Okay. So one, Israel isn't a democracy. That's one. Are there any other countries that are democracies in the Middle East?
Iran.
Iran?
Iran.
Iraq. Okay. What else?
I mean, even Iran also they hold elections too. But honestly, it's not even about just the word democracy itself. Does democracy include apartheid? Does it include occupation? Does it include, differential treatment? All of that should be mentioned. If that's what democracy is, probably not.
Absolutely. All Jews support the state of Israel.
If that was true, they wouldn't be hurting and attacking their own kind that don't appreciate what they're doing.
Absolutely. There's many Jews that are in protest of not just the things that Israel is doing, but also the existence of the state of Israel.
And I think I'll add to that how it's not a democracy, even that much so.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not a democracy.
They have a different way of thinking.
Do you guys know, for example, there is Nutri-Karta, even religious Orthodox Jews who protest, even here in the United States, in New York. Every protest against even the existence of the state of Israel. Of course, we have also Jewish Voices for Peace. Here they have a chapter in South Florida that also, stands up in different arenas here against the crimes of the state of Israel.
Oftentimes we'll hear this. Palestinians don't want peace. That's why Palestinians reject the two-state solution.
No.
False. How
What
so?
did I say about this? Try to remember what I said about this. Were Palestinians, even if you're going to take them, were they ever offered a state to begin with? They were never even offered a state to begin with. So I don't know where that argument comes from.
What was the line of Ghassan Kanafani? He said, how do you negotiate with the snake that's trying to bite you?
Right.
Something like that. The Israeli military's actions are solely in self-defense. We got some brothers speaking up. I like it. How is it false? Absolutely. They're the offenders. They're the ones making the advances. They're the ones initiating. I always forget this part.
So talking about dehumanizing Palestinians, those are the faces of some faces you guys have seen, right? For example, we have Ammu Khalid, right, the grandfather who also eventually, he buried two of his grandkids. He eventually also was murdered and killed. Then we have Sidra, we have, what are some of the names as well? Taha, right? Rahim.
And of course,
And then lastly but not least, Hind Rajab, right? All of those, you don't see those faces in American media, unfortunately. You don't see them, you don't hear their names, you don't even hear their stories. But if it was the other way around, the situation would have been completely different.
So I'm sure you guys are all familiar with the story of Hind Rajab. There was 355 bullets shot at her car. Everybody else in her car was killed. She was on the phone with paramedics, and the paramedics, even when they got to the scene, they weren't allowed there, to the car. And eventually, when somebody was able to make it, they found paramedics dead also on their way to that car. So this is the recording from that paramedic facility.
ماشيين وهو هلا قاعد في السيارة السيارة. خليكي يا عمرة السيارة، أنا حتمني فاتحة خط معاكي، أتمني أحكي معك، ما بدي أفكر التليفون، تمام؟ الدبابة وين؟ الدبابة جنبكم؟ عم تتحرك ولا واقف؟ نزل حدا منها؟ تتحرك؟ هي بتتحرك جنب السيارة ولا هي جاية من ورا السيارة أو من قدام السيارة؟ هي جاية عليكي من قدام السيارة الدبابة؟ قريبة كتير؟ وعم تمشي؟ ما بدنا نخاف. أنا معك يا أصلا. أنا معك. أنا معك ليش كذا يا أختي؟ ما بدي أزيد في حالك. لا أنا بدأتي معاكي لأطمن إنه حدا هلال أو حدا جاي ياخذك بديش أفطر حتى أنت إذا أجوا لا سمح الله الجيش ما بتصلي خلي الخط مفتوح ما بتنصر أنا معك. إيش يا عمري؟ يا حبيبتي والله معك هيك أنا مش قادرة أحكي معاكي ما بدي أصلا أتركك. ايه؟ ايه؟ حبيبتي والله لو بإيدي لأريكي نحكي يا الله يا رب تحمينا.
I know it can get emotionally heavy listening to that, but that's good. If you're feeling emotional, that's good. That means your heart hasn't hardened to the point that you don't feel anymore. We know the hadith from the Prophet ﷺ, the ummah is one body, right? And oftentimes we translate it as if one part hurts, the whole body hurts. But the word actually used is sleeplessness. It's not just about feeling pain, it's about feeling so much pain that you can't sleep at night. That it wakes you up in the middle. You can't rest. Right now we've got Muslims in our own communities going to weddings, having parties, and they forget because we don't remember these things. And that's why every single time in our presentation we watch the video of Hind Rajab. And it's not easy. You probably saw me and Sister Lubnaa discussing right before we played it, should we play it? Because it's not easy watching it. But you know what it does? It keeps us locked in. It keeps us focused on remembering what we're supposed to be doing here. What our responsibility is. Hind Rajab isn't some random Palestinian girl. That's my niece. That's my daughter. And tomorrow, if today we don't stand up for Hind, tomorrow it's going to be somebody else. Tomorrow it's going to be a little girl in Lebanon. Because we know that they're not going to stop this project for greater Israel. They're going to keep expanding. They're fulfilling their mission, are we fulfilling ours? That's the question we need to ask ourselves.
Jazakallah khair. So inshallah we're going to wrap up. Today we've walked through thousands of years of history, from Natufians to prophets to empires to colonial powers, from the Nakba to today. We've looked at myths that distort reality, the role of international law, politics of Zionism and US involvement, and the many forms of Palestinian resistance and how narratives are shaped and weaponized. If there is one lesson I hope you carry with you today, it's this: the story of Palestinians is not abstract. It is about real people. Families who lived on this land for generations, children who deserve to grow up free, communities who continue to fight not only to survive but for dignity. So we've seen the narrative twisted to erase or dehumanize Palestinians. This means that each of us has a responsibility to question what we're told, to amplify Palestinian voices, to challenge myths when we hear them, and to make sure that our tax dollars, our classrooms, and our conversations reflect truth and justice. Honestly, I know I'm a Palestinian, and I don't take any pride in that. I just happen to have a grandfather who was born in Palestine, but Palestine is not for Palestinians, wallahi. It is a Muslim issue. And if you don't, it is a waqf. Islamically, even in Islamic fiqh book, Palestine is a waqf. Bayt al-Maqdis is a waqf. Waqf means it belongs to every single Muslim, and every person that says La ilaha illallah has a responsibility to defend that land. It is the land that all the prophets, this is the only piece of land where all the prophets united together and prayed together. I don't have to go on about why Bayt al-Maqdis is Islamically relevant. I'm sure all of us know. Place where Isra and Mi'raj took place. And many reasons. And this itself can take a whole lecture, an hour lecture. But it's our duty to stand up for Bayt al-Maqdis, for Al-Quds, who was closed. Masjid al-Aqsa was closed for 40 days. Entire Ramadan wasn't prayed Taraweeh in. Wallahi, if this happened to a synagogue, we would see the entire world talking about it in every news article and in every news station. So just to close this, justice for Palestine is not only possible, wallahi, it's inevitable. The question we should all ask ourselves, what role did I play in that inevitable liberation of Palestine? What did I do? Will I stand in the day of judgment answering Allah? I said, oh Allah, I did my role. Big or small, even a mother at home can make phone calls. Even a child in school can do something. We have to teach ourselves and the upcoming generations, we have to put our stamp in this path of liberating Palestine. Jazakumullah khair, everyone. Sorry for going for too long, but we appreciate you. May Allah reward you.